My name is Prince,
Uh-huh.
and the surname is Charles, and that is on my ID, and I promise that's on my ID.
And I
I
was
am
actually
from
going
the
to
East.
ask you that ukuba hey ithini lento ligama lamanyani eli or is it that into is it a stage name?
No, it's Lika Madame Lamanyan, and part of this discussion is to say, I'll also add, one of the nice things or the contradictions, or should I say, of having a white name. If we're talking about Black Lives Matter and these things about privilege, and how has it been for me to have to sign a prevalently white English name? What type of reactions you get out of that?
Exactly, when you are sending your
And
CVs and applications and so forth.
yes. But anyway, I'm from a town called Queenstown, Ekomani. That's where I was born, and I stayed there for a very long time. And I then went on to study in Port Elizabeth, where I also stayed for a very long time. But now I'm based in Pretoria, and I have a passion. I have a passion for young people, particularly young people who are driving change. Young people who think outside the box. But who not only think outside the box, but actually burn the box altogether.
Wow.
And get rid of the box. Yeah, so that is me, and what I believe in. I'm a humanist. I believe in the importance of a human life, whether that human is rich or poor. On all its different complexities. I have a great love for human beings and society in general. And one of my favorite quotes is to say, champions come from ordinary people. Ordinary people who just have ordinary determination. So I love this song that we're just ordinary people by John Legend that you just played now.
Wow. What a beautiful introduction. What a beautiful introduction there. And you've touched on something and that I think really we will need to get into as we progress with our conversation. Really the benefits and the something I can say the luggage that comes with having if I can say a white name and all of that. But before we get into that, when it comes to your passion for young people and development, I just want to get a sense about where does that come from. Why are you so passionate about young people? Because there's so many things that you could be passionate about. Because one thing that when you say that you are passionate about young people, you're basically saying that I've decided not to. In fact, not to say decided, but I could be passionate about things that have to do with me, but I'm more passionate about, young people and development. Where did that come from, Kuwe?
I think, this is a very interesting question that I always grapple with. Because our lives as human beings, we understand our lives forward. We grow in age in terms of the numbers get higher, but we understand our lives backwards.
Okay.
So in order for us to understand why do we have the views we have or the passions that we have to go back to childhood. Because there's one saying, I don't know if by Picasso or whoever, who said that we are all born artists, but the struggle is to remain an artist as you grow up. So this is types of quotes and thinkings that got me thinking about where does this passion come from. And it's about the beauty of children, how children are so forgiving, how children are not afraid to be wrong. If they don't know something, they just give a go. And children are opinionated. That sense versus the world that we as adults have become to encounter, where to be wrong or to not know something is like a massive crime. As a result, we end up pretending that we know things when we sometimes don't. So that passion of youth development stems from spending some time with children. And the simplicity of life with children. They would fight now and they'd forgive each other. and how they begin friendships. You are my friend. They say that.
Yeah.
And when they break the friendships,
yeah.
those clear boundaries in a very simple world that children live in, an ideal world, but it's a reflection of the world that we could reconstruct, or we could go back to childhood and keep certain things that we have lost throughout the way. So my passion for youth development stems from that.
Yeah.
Particularly about children.
Wow, that's beautiful. And that's so true, because really when you look at children, I love even the example that you make. Kumdana will tell you, Goti, Yuena or yam. And if in Dagaitandi, I'll say yam, go straight forward, don't cut around, beat around the bush. No, it's direct. So I really love how you have put it. Well, I think let's go straight into what people are tuned in to listen and hear today. We're talking about, human lives versus Black Lives Matter movement, and reflecting on it after in retrospect, basically. The first question that I want to ask you, and to give you the space to kind of like maybe lay your foundation to this conversation, is, are these two things even related? Human Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter, and what is the correlation between these two concepts, Human Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter?
I think it is an indictment on society, first of all, to in the 21st century, to be even talking about this. That should send shockwaves to our consciences.
Yeah.
I mean, how could we be discussing this in the 21st century? I would understand perhaps if we were still, in the Middle Ages, and then where Black Africans particularly were treated as slave and subhuman. So then the discussion would be, does their life matter or does human life matter? As if the two are actually two different things.
Separate
They're
entities.
They're not two different things. They are so in fact they are one thing. They're interrelated. But now what has happened is, the reason why we are discussing this, and the reason why it is because of a pushback that you have from society. When you say Black Lives Matter, they assume that that is sort of a contradiction or a contrast to something else. You're saying Black Lives Matter beyond everything else. This comes from this type of thinking that we have developed, particularly in capitalist societies, where everything is about gain. It's what I sometimes call market thinking. It has crept up through all the parts of our society. Even religion. So people go to church now because we want to go to heaven.
Yeah.
We don't go to church because it's good that we do.
No.
We don't do right things because that is a proper, but because there's a sort of an attachment that is beneficial, that is there.
That I'm going to get.
Yes. So that is the discussion that is central around about that. So when you're saying Black Lives Matter, there are people who assume that you are taking the fact that Black Lives Matter takes away from something from them, which is not true in actual fact. So when people say Black Lives Matter, it is all lives matter in actual fact. That's what it says. It's interrelated. It's one thing, and we shouldn't be having this discussion in the 21st century.
Now, to that, I want to be the devil's advocate here and say, but when you stand and say Black Lives Matter, there is a provisor to that statement, an underlying narrative, as you said, Eti, then other lives don't matter, and that is going to have its implications, even if the movement it is based on a good intention. But formulating such a terminology, it has much more it will have much more negative effects than it will actually yield positive reactions to help the cause. And someone would say, why not human lives matter rather than saying Black Lives Matter? Because then, like said, human lives matter, it is taking into account everyone, and it is not alienating anyone in the broad spectrum of, if we can say, color that separates people today. Why is it important? And is it even a good idea to stand for the movement of Black Lives Matter, seeing the divide that it is able to cause?
Society, you see, I'll start with the last part of your question, where we fight division in society as if, because we've been taught that division is a negative thing. In actual fact, human life is founded on diversity. So the beauty of who we are stems from the beauty of having different opinions about the same thing. Well, you can go into the history of sociology, why we have the different opinions, but that's a lecture for another time. But I think we mustn't view the divisions and the difference in opinion as a particularly negative thing, because had we been thinking the same, then that would be something wrong with us as human society. Now, in terms of whether the negativity that stems, why not say human lives matter? This thing is stems, I think, partly from history, and how people have always been, categorized. Women have had the same thing. When women stand for their rights, say, why can't we say everybody's lives matter? If you get what I'm saying. And there's been an issue about Women's Day also. Why don't we have a Men's Day if we have Women's Day? Father's Day. You sort of discussions that are there. Black Africans have been at the receiving end of victimization. Their history is littered with slavery, particularly in the United States context. So I believe the disempowered must be empowered. One of the important things about change or driving change in society, it is to make those who are at the periphery take them back to the center. It is about making those who are uncomfortable comfortable, and vice versa. Those who are comfortable, make them uncomfortable. I think this is what this movement is about. It's framed of which that's why I even offer my support in some of the sentiments that they share. So placing Black African people at the center of discussion, I believe is a legitimate cause, and it deserves to be there. Because it's completely a legitimate cause that deserves to be given a platform and an ear,
and be kind of conversed about. But this is my I think maybe I could say my tiff. This is my personal opinion when it comes to the movement, Black Lives Matter. It is that, as much as the and I share the sentiments and the views of, or rather the intentions of the movement, but I'm afraid of the implications that sometimes may rise when we term some of our movements and we follow to act in a certain way with regards to them. Let me make an example. During this Black Lives Matter movement, for someone to say human lives matter, it was almost as if you are being a white apologist and you are now annulling everything that the Black Lives Matter movement stands for. Why is it that when we have these movements, Umuntu has to be in agreement and fall under one umbrella, rather than hearing each and everyone out and not always painting everyone with the same brush? Because the fear that was, in fact, even in America, they were currently fighting for the defunding of the police department. And for me, I was like, but I personally believe that that is an disingenuous idea, because police are supposed to be there to protect the society. And if now you are going to say that let's defund, the state must defund the police, then when terrible things happen in the society, who are we then going to blame? Who are we going to ask to protect us? So we've seen happening when you track and look at people who have had opposite opinions to some of the things that the Black Lives Matter movement stands for. We enter into that cancel culture. If you stand for this, then keep quiet. If you say that the police must not be defunded, then we must cancel and do away with you. Why is it that we're not able to come to a center point and say, okay, fine, we may not agree in that part and that part, but the notion and the sentiments we do agree kuyo? Why is it? Because now it's either or when we're talking about, especially when we talk about the Black Lives Matter movement. It has been more than, really bringing people together, more decisive than ever.
I think this is an international problem, particularly even here in South Africa. It goes back, I think, to how we form movements and how we understand their role in society. And particularly one of the challenges with this kind of movements, or with movements in general, so it's very easy just to say the answer is this and this and this, but we have to trace back the challenge that we are facing. Number one, we have an explosion in terms of the numbers of the population in the world. In human history, we've never had the number of people on Earth than we have today, at this current moment. And then there's the second issue. There's been what I call the death of distance.
Okay.
So what that means is, you see, in history, distance used to sort of filter things. Let's say something happens in America.
Wow.
Black Lives Matter, or the protest that's there. It'll take us a news cycle to get here. By that time, the politicians have gotten time to intervene, and people, you understand, it gets to us in a certain amount of time. Now, the death of distance has died in the sense that we are live in America. We can see what is happening at this moment. That has an impact on how we view things. That's how it has an impact on how movements structure themselves. And sort of the urgency of things that needs to happen. So this is why you find very hardline stances, very urgent, very anti-discussion. Same here in South Africa about race here in South Africa. If you talk about race in South Africa, there's this narrative that we must all agree that white people must go back to the sea. They stole our land. If you have any difference in opinion to that, I mean, I've been called, you are a liberal, you are this, you are sell out. This kind of words that sort of kill discussion. So we have got to trace these things. Where do they come from in terms of understanding the history of movements, the populations, all these things. It's just a few of them that I've just picked up that cause these kind of things, and they will have an impact in how we design movements for the future. The problem with these things, with the manner that people are shut down, who have difference in opinions, what it does, it alienates the population. Because in order for any movement to be successful, it needs to mobilize the masses. It needs to be a very simple message, and it needs to resonate. It needs to carry on for a lengthy amount of time, and people must resonate with the message. And those who do not agree with it, that's why you need activists. That is why you need political activists. All the parts of society have to come together for a movement to work. So that for those who don't agree, you've got those who are going to convince them. Now the problem is convincing. It takes time. It takes interaction, and with a sense of urgency where we don't have time for interaction, because the news cycle is. We have to push this movement In order to trend on Twitter, we don't have time for people who have difference in opinion. All of these things have had an impact, and in actual fact are killing activism around the world.
They're even killing the same movements that have a potentially good cause that they stand for and a good intention, but they die because of this.
Exactly. And it's I studied sociology, by the way. So you know how movements or churches or parties or all of these things that we have, they come from somebody having an idea or a vision of God, if you want to call it that, or a vision of a better life. Now, in order for that vision to move through in history, it will need a vehicle that will take it through history. It needs sort of an institution. Movements are institutions. Families are institutions. Churches are institutions. Political parties are institutions. So in order to have that good idea that you have, you need to create a routine. You need to create a vehicle that is going to take it through history. That's what the German sociologist Max Weber, he calls it the routinization of charisma. So charisma has to have like a routine so that it doesn't die with the person who brings it to birth. So you have to create a routine. It's one of the things I also say about the Eastern Cape when I criticize the Eastern Cape. We always praise ourselves of having had people like Nelson Mandela, and we list these leaders all who come from our province. But we can't say what exactly is it that is producing these people in our province. Is it our culture? Is it the language? Is it the air? Because had we known what it is, we would routinize it so that we carry on doing that same thing, so that we have more of those Mandelas and even better.
So it's not just a matter of chance.
Yes, something is producing good people. So this is why you have to routinize charisma. You have to find out so that these movements don't die. Because once you don't routinize charisma, you're going to have the same problem of movements who are going to depend on news cycles. Talk about Black Lives Matter, and then we don't hear about it in the news, and
It's
then
dead.
until the next person is killed, then the whole thing will repeat itself all over again, waiting for the next crisis to come about again.
So basically, there's not even any actual moving forward. We're just going in a cycle. And this, alludes to a question that I want to ask you just after we take this musical break. But why is it that we are, and perhaps maybe you've already touched on this, but why is it that we always seem to wake up and take these things seriously when we start to see them on the news? And predominantly when we start seeing events that took place in America, that took place in somewhere else abroad, and when similar incidents take place here in South Africa, we seem as not to be so concerned, and you start to see this even in the news cycle. Certain news that happen and take place that if ibinokwenzeka in America, it would remain for quite some time and it will trend in our news cycles. But when it comes to the context of Africa, you find that it's not given time of day. You can talk about what is currently happening in Zimbabwe, and to check even our media, there's not that much information about it. But in contrast, and look, it's not actually the same incidents, but we look at what's happening with the George Floyd Mayweather incident. The video clips were all over, were being played on our national TV broadcasters. And if we talk about some incidents that took place here in South Africa, I think a month or before, during that time, they might have only appeared on the news once. The question that I want you to think about as we are going to take a song is, why is it that we only take things seriously when they happen in the international context, but senzeka apa in South Africa we don't take them seriously at all? They are not a problem, and then when we start to see them in America, this is what has happened.
Tobani, that's a very good question. Yeah, it's a very good question. I'll answer it bluntly, and I'll be very blunt and controversial about it. It's called self-hate. We hate ourselves. We hate the image that we have of being African people, and we have internalized what oppression has done to us, and part of it at the center of that is that, and we have assigned certain values to certain bodies. So the life of a black Zimbabwean gay albino female versus a black male in Sandton. So it's about class. It's about self-hate. It's a very complex and very deep understanding of who we are about ourselves, how we have internal, this is some of the damage that we have from oppression. When something is in America, because of Americans have a certain class that we attach to, even black Americans for that matter, African Americans, we give them a certain status versus ourselves.
Sure. Wow. I just want you to hold it there and let us take this song. We just had a technical glitch there, so when you come back I want you to continue with that line of thought. I want you to let you know, you can send in your messages and your voice notes. Pago 063-698-7566. I'm in conversation with Prince Charles. We're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, re-evaluating everything after the dust has settled. We are going to take a song, and when we come back from this song, you can send in your messages. We will read them. Pago 063-698-7566. Oh yes, you're tuned into Radio 537, and I'm your host Tobani Vuminda. But this is your favorite radio station, and this is your favorite late night show called On the Table with your host Tobani Vuminda. And of course, you can send in your messages and your WhatsApp and your voice notes. Pago 063-698-7566. Unfortunately, to take your calls, so you can just send in your voice notes, your text, and your WhatsApp messages. Pago 063-698-7566, and we'll definitely read them. If you're just tuned in, Galogo, and now you're coming back from work, this is Radio 537, and the time now, it is 40 minutes after the hour of 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and 9 o'clock. We are in conversation with Prince Charles. We are talking about Black Lives versus Human Lives Matter movement and reviewing the movement after the dust has settled. And before we went to the musical break, we were talking about, why do we seem to prioritize a movement as a tiller when incidents start to appear in the news? But close to home, we don't really take it seriously. And Prince Charles, you alluded to something before we went to the ad break, and you talked about the fact that we have kind of internalized the effects of the past that we went through, and we have a sense of self-hate. How did we get to this point, really, whereby izinto sizithatha ngeenyawo zonke ezinkulu, and we celebrate, we fight, and we go all out when the movements seem to be outside and far away from us? But when it comes to close home, ithini lento yezi social standards, ithini lento ye status and classism that I think sisizifumana sikuyo as abantu abamnyama?
Tobani, it comes from the fact that when people are oppressed and brutally so, and then they yearn to be free, they want to be free, but the consequence of that is once they are free, they then begin to emulate the oppressors because they want to be just like that. So that is the contradiction about liberation and post-liberation, if liberation is there at all. So it's not just saying we are then free to vote. It is a psychological, the effects that we have are massive, and they'll continue to be massive for many, many years until we really start to change the manner in which we think in empowering the institutions of society. That's why my view sometimes is always the institutions of society are the ones that are going to help us. But we've got this thing that it's only politics that is going to help us. And we have therefore killed the entire,
we are waiting for a Messiah.
Yes. So we are messianic thinking that the politics will save us or leaders will save us. I was even listening to the conversation that Butlali was having, and I believe there's an overemphasis on leadership. When are we going to talk about a follower? This person is a leader, this one is a leader. We never talk about the followers. Because we can't all be leading, and what is a follower? What is a follower? What it's supposed to look like a follower? So, entrenched with this self-hate is the emulation that we are victims of oppression. We must acknowledge that African people are victims of oppression. And have we done enough to fix the trauma? It's not just easy to just blame people that we are victims of oppression. Has there been anything done to look into the trauma that we suffered as a people? We are a nation, in South Africa particularly, we are a post-conflict nation. It's like we've been through war, basically. Yeah. So these things of self-hate, they stem from some of our understanding. That's where they come from.
How we view ourselves as a people, how do we see ourselves? And I'm just thinking with what you started off saying, Gogoti, when we have been oppressed, sometimes when the oppression ends, if it ends at all, we now take the position or strive to take the position being acted out by our oppressor. And another clinical psychologist, Jordan Peterson, once said, sometimes we need to examine the reason why we want what we want, why we are passionate about certain things. And in this context, maybe we've never really sat down and as a people, as a whole, look at why do we really want freedom? Is it because we have gained hatred for the white people who are oppressing us? And for that reason we want to be free so that we can oppress them back, or we want freedom so that singakhuleka to be able to make decisions for ourselves and be able to occupy spaces that we were not able to occupy before. So I'm just really thinking about how true what we are talking about, because if we have never sat down with ourselves and ask ourselves, why do we want what we want and why are we fighting for what we are fighting for, then sometimes we are going to really end up, emulating exactly the way that our oppressor did. And this is why even when it comes to movements like the Blavk Lives Matter movement, I sometimes get afraid to go to, I wonder if are we not going to end up reversing a racism to an extent where now we are the superior race and we oppress the other race. But that is a conversation for another day. I want you to as well, approaching the end of our conversation, to kind of like shine some light on the reality now of living in a world where racism does exist, and there are certain perceptions that come with being a white person. And you even talked about it, it's not even just white people, there is classism even amongst us as black people, where you find that if you're a black American, you are more important, and there's a certain status that is alluded to you. And I want you to touch, Kanye, on the fact that you have a white people's name and surname, it's all together. How has that experience been?
I think it debunks the fact that there are people who deny that white privilege exists. So having had an English name, I would say, instead of a white name, I'll say an English name. Yeah. So it debunks that the white privilege does not exist. It does exist. And this is coming from an African. So if I write my name and request something, I write my name on an email. And then level of urgency that things get, they get very quickly, and then you'd find someone at your gate in 5 minutes. I'm looking for Mr. Charles. No, this is Mr. Charles. Oh, you look at the surprise that people get, and having looked into this for a very long time, particularly for young people who come from these Model C high schools, the manner in that, instead of us fighting oppression, fighting this notion that is there in society, we have actually found a way to maneuver our way within the system, to say, if this is, I feel like I'm in a racial community or in a situation that's racial, then you can be able to switch on to your accent to get you out of this situation. I have adapted to. This goes back to what I was saying earlier on, that when we say black people, there's a very dangerous assumption that black people are all the same. I don't like the term black people. I prefer African people. But that's a debate for another day. So when we say black people, we assume that this is one group of people that is characterized unified by one thing. Actually, black African people are a diverse group of people with different interests. So the danger here is to blanket African and black people as one group who are striving for the same thing. What you are going to have as a consequence of that, as you were talking about movements and liberation and so forth, what you're going to have people who are going to ride the wave of a movement for their own self-enrichment. Because as in sociology, there's something called an iron law of institutions. It says those who control institutions care first and foremost about their power within the institution than the power of the institution itself. So this is therefore rounds up to say the generalizations that we have about what it means to be a black person must change. Otherwise, we will kill the future of African people. It will kill their resolve and their fight for a just and equitable life.
Wow, what a beautiful one there. And I just want to echo something that you have said, and this is my own personal takeaway from everything that we have been talking about. And I think this can be really a solution to even some of the conversations that we are having and in public. There's an overemphasis on leadership. What about the follower? That really stuck with me, because someone once put it like this: with a follower, there's no leader. So if we're really putting so much emphasis on leadership and not really talking about the follower and the state of being a follower, there is going to be negative effects to that as well. Not that we should not talk about leadership, but perhaps maybe we really need to take time and speak to the follower as well, so that the follower may be equipped, so that the follower may have the power and know the power that they wield in their hands. Putiman, your last words with regards to our conversation, and maybe what do we do, how do we go forward from this, and how can we better handle ourselves as a society to make sure the movements that we have, they don't die down after a new cycle, when the new cycle changes and the movement also dies away, and therefore even its impact goes away. Siphele cycle that you alluded to earlier on. What do we do from here?
I think the most simplest thing, because some of the solutions or suggestions of solutions seem so complex that you think this is impossible to do. We need to revive our institutions as African people. By institutions, I don't mean buildings and governments and all these things that we assume to be institutions. Families, the relationships we have with one another. Very simple thing, that start treating the person next to you with more humanity and with more dignity. It is as simple as that, because you see, to be an African, I mean, how is it different from being an Asian, or what is different about us as African people? We have to discover those small things. And we always talk about Ubuntu, and Ubuntu has become so commercialized now we don't even recognize what it is. I always say, to be an African is not a geographical location that we are in Africa, or it's not a people, just a people. It's a frame of mind. It's a frame of mind, and we have got to just rediscover that. And we have to have a nation's frame of mind. Because you see, to be an African, to have a nation, it's like it's portable. So an Italian, it doesn't matter where they are in the world. If you say they respond to Italian. If you say Italian, they respond, because they've got this sense of a nation's frame of mind. Wherever they are, they carry themselves. So a greater amount of humanity, simplicity, and making sure that we empower the institutions that we have, the relationships that we have with our families, making sure our families work. And by family, I don't mean the sort of the nuclear family with a mother and a father and whatever, but family in its diversity. Times are changing. I mean, you've got two males or two men or two women now having families. That is a family. So we've got to empower those things and appreciate them, and make sure that we have an institution that is running in society to empower, to make sure that we become a different people who think differently, who think outside the box.
Wow, beautiful. Well, I thank you so much, Manputu, for taking your time and joining us. I know good people are busy, and especially at this time of the day, but you decided to come through and really bring light to such a topic. Thank you so much. Your last words, and Nokpapa Sanjapa to all the listeners at home.
My last words, I think, thank you very much also for extending the invite. A beautiful radio station. I've been following it throughout the week. Great content. So thank you to you too, and Butlali. And it's been really, and for the first time, I always tease people who come on radio stations and Zoom in this new virtual COVID-19 situation. It's for the first time that I've been told to unmute yourself. I always laugh at people who are told to unmute themselves. And I have been told to unmute myself. So we learn every day. We understand our lives forward. We grow forward, but we understand our lives
backwards. Wow, thank you so much. That was a beautiful interview there. In our guest today, Prince Charles, and he was joining us as we are talking about, reviewing human lives versus Black Lives movement, and we have really touched on a lot. And of course, stay tuned, because later on, as we are going to have our late night thought, we're going to have a full circle, and after everything, before we close off the show, we're going to be recapping on everything that we have talked about on this show. Masiko Pamanikesi tunamhlanje with this beautiful song from Chris Brown.